Hi everyone, Lexi here. Remember when we first saw the teaser for Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake, and then it disappeared for years only to come back as a complete remake of the entire Erdrick Trilogy? Well, we've finally reached the end of that journey with Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake. Huge thanks to Square Enix for providing me with a Switch 2 game code. Unlike a lot of bundled releases I've reviewed, Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake features two completely rebuilt games that bring these classics up to modern standards while keeping the spirit of what made them special. But here's the twist. Because this release recognizes its place as part of a trilogy, Square Enix strengthened the connections between all three games. And with the benefit of hindsight, knowing that Dragon Quest II serves as the finale, they've made its remake the real showstopper. Still, that doesn't mean Dragon Quest I got overlooked. It's a perfect breather from the complexity of Dragon Quest III, and a reminder of how simplicity can still shine. These differences became even clearer because I experienced both games in a unique way. I played both games simultaneously, and this only highlighted how both games offered wildly different yet complementary experiences. Since both remakes have such different focuses, I've divided this review into three parts. One dedicated to Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake, another to Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, and a final section looking at what both games share and how they tie everything together. It's easy to overlook Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake because of its more simplistic gameplay. After all, even within its place in the Erdrick Trilogy, it's still the very first game in the series chronologically. And while I've seen plenty of fear, uncertainty, and doubt surrounding the announced changes to this remake, I can happily report that these concerns are unfounded. For starters, this version now pits your lone hero against multiple enemies at once. Some people worried that this would just bloat battles and make them drag on longer. But in reality, every fight still wraps up about as quickly as before. That's partly thanks to the many scrolls you'll find scattered throughout the world, which let you learn new abilities to handle tougher foes more efficiently. It also adds a nice layer of strategy. Enemy variety matters now, and you actually have to think about each encounter instead of relying on tactics to do the work for you. The result is combat that feels fresh, punchy, and, especially in later parts of the game, genuinely exhilarating. It's a small change that really increases the stakes each time you jump into combat, and adds just the right amount of variance that breathes new life into the Dragon Quest I experience. But perhaps the biggest takeaway I got from playing Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake is how the experience felt cozier. I know that word gets thrown around a lot these days, but after having to juggle multiple party members and vocations in last year's remake, this remake of Dragon Quest I honestly feels like a well-earned vacation. Since you're only managing one character, there's no debating who gets that seed of life, wisdom, or strength you just picked up in a dungeon. You just use it. Simple as that. The same goes for grinding for weapons and armor. You're only worrying about one hero. And that's another reason why battles still wrap up just as quickly as before. The game is balanced around one character rather than a full party. But it can't be denied that Dragon Quest I's journey feels like a solitary experience, and that can sometimes come across as lonely. While Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake keeps that solo hero structure, it now weaves in other traveling parties and groups you'll meet along the way. They've been seamlessly integrated into the story, making it feel like you're sharing this journey with others, even if they're not technically part of your party. It's a smart, subtle way to make the world feel alive rather than static, as if life goes on whether you're there or not. And while quote-unquote breathing life into the world has become a bit of a cliche these days, here it really fits. Because these small scenes add warmth and texture the original never had. Best of all, it doesn't pad the main story significantly or overstay its welcome. In fact, every aspect of this remake's presentation feels deliberate. Nothing here exists just to artificially pad the game's length. Of the two remakes in this bundle, Dragon Quest I actually features the least amount of voice acting. Square Enix clearly understood that adding fully voiced scenes can slow progression dramatically, if not handled carefully. So instead, they used voice acting selectively, saving it for moments where it would have the most impact. Not every main story scene is voiced, and that restraint keeps the pacing brisk, while letting the writing stand on its own. Frankly, it's easy to underestimate Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake just because, well, it's the first one. I sure did. But when I found myself frustrated with Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, I'm looking at you, Lighthouse, I realized that I could just fall back on Dragon Quest I and keep playing. It might not have the depth or complexity of parts 2 and 3, but I think it's clear why this remake offers such a different kind of experience, one that complements the others perfectly. And honestly, if you're planning to play through the whole trilogy, I'd recommend keeping Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake close by. It's the perfect palate cleanser between the larger, denser adventures. If Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake is the hearty appetizer and Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake the light in-between course, unless you're like me and played them side by side, then Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake is both the main entree and dessert all at once. Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake wastes no time setting the stakes for your adventure with its opening cutscene, and honestly, it has to be seen to be believed. There's so much voice acting and drama packed into these moments that I remember thinking, okay, wow, so this is where all of that voice acting budget from Dragon Quest I went. I said that jokingly, of course, but it really does feel that way. And for a game meant to close out the Erdrick Trilogy, it's the perfect way to set the stage for the finale. In fact, much of Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake feels like it finally knows exactly what it is. Earlier versions, by comparison, were made before the series had fully found its identity, and little thought was given where the story belonged within the Erdrick Trilogy. As a developer, you're always looking for an out, a way to write yourself out of a corner so you can make a sequel that still makes sense. But now, with the benefit of history, we now know how it all fits together. Dragon Quest III became the prequel, and Dragon Quest II stands as the true finale of the trilogy. The previous remakes never really embraced that idea, and because of that, Part 2 never quite felt like the grand conclusion it should have been. So it's only natural that Square Enix looked back at the trilogy and said, you know what, for as great as the series is, this finale deserves to be bigger. Much like Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake, Part 2 adds new areas and extended scenes that bring more drama and weight to the story. And yet, despite those additions, the overall playtime is only slightly longer than the original. Yes, the voiced scenes add a bit to that, but it's absolutely worth it. While Part 2 features more voiced lines than Part 1, you can still feel that same sense of restraint Square Enix used in the first game, expanding only the moments with real emotional impact, and using voice acting to heighten them rather than overwhelm them. All that said, the biggest mistake I made playing through this game was expecting that many of the new story additions, such as the Princess of Cannock and the brand new underwater section, could be found within the first half of the game. As such, I felt like I tried to blast through the first several hours of the game as quickly as I could to get to those areas. I thought, surely, the Princess of Cannock would be available close to the beginning of the game as a permanent party member, right? As it turns out, I was completely mistaken. You probably noticed that much of this section focused on Dragon Quest II's role as the finale of the Erdrick Trilogy, and that was very much on purpose. Many of the systematic changes introduced here also appear in Part 1, which is why the two games feel so closely connected. But it's important not to lose sight of how much more elevated this version of Dragon Quest II feels compared to earlier releases. For the first time, it truly delivers on the promise of being the grand finale it was always meant to be. As I mentioned earlier, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD-2D Remake share a lot in common when it comes to their systems, despite their different roles within the Erdrick Trilogy. Like Dragon Quest 3 HD-2D Remake, both games include selectable difficulty settings in the form of Draki, Dragon, and Draconian Quest, easy, normal, and hard, respectively. There's also a toggle that restores HP and MP during level ups if you want to make things a little easier, or you can disable it entirely to make the game tougher. You can even map shortcuts for abilities and spells to use while exploring. There are also scrolls, which I've mentioned earlier, that teach characters new abilities, which expand your tactical options in both games. And yes, zoom does go through ceilings. It was kinda cute when you used to bump your head on them, but let's be honest, it was more of a pain than anything else. Though, I have to admit, it does make evac a little useless in some cases. One thing the Erdrick Trilogy reminded me of is just how perilous the journey can feel when you stray off the beaten path. In modern RPGs, you might face slightly tougher enemies when you wander into a forest or travel at night, but rarely the kind that truly puts you in danger. In the Erdrick Trilogy, stepping into unfamiliar territory feels dangerous, and the world map itself was carefully designed around that idea. Modern RPGs tend to reserve real danger for dungeons, which makes exploration a little too predictable. But these games were made in an era when simply crossing the overworld could be as risky and as thrilling as any dungeon descent. I can't tell you how many times I've foolishly tried to cut corners in all three games, and every single time, I've been punished for it by running into an enemy that completely outclassed me. And that's actually part of why many players felt that earlier JRPGs offered a greater sense of freedom with exploration. And yes, Dragon Quest games can feel grindy, whether it's for weapons, armor, or levels, especially in the Erdrick Trilogy. Fortunately, random treasures and hidden spots across the world map are still there, and only the hidden spots can be toggled to appear on your map. Additionally, the game can also flag treasure chests you'll find in dungeons directly on the map itself. These are just a few ways Square Enix saves players time without outright handing them rewards, or in some cases, knowledge. You still have to get to those treasures, of course. That brings me to some comments I've seen from players of Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake who felt that these additions made the game easier. While I'll admit that a few treasures were placed questionably in that game, I can say with confidence that that's not the case here. In both of these remakes, everything functions exactly as intended. And to those who said that the remake of Part 3 was too easy, well, Square Enix clearly heard you. They've devilishly remixed enemy groups in these remakes, so you can't just blow through them haphazardly. Sure, there are still weak enemies you'll mow down, but others will test how well you truly understand the game's systems. And no, you can't just rely on elemental or ability weaknesses this time. In fact, the game now even lets you toggle an option and make certain skills and abilities shimmer when an enemy on the field is weak to them, and it also highlights which enemies are vulnerable in return. Still, even with that information, it often comes down to race conditions. Like in Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake, if two enemies are left and one of them hits hard but will go down in a single regular attack, do you take that risk and hope a crit doesn't happen? Or do you keep healing until a better opportunity opens up? Now, combine that kind of decision-making with how labyrinthine the Erdrick Trilogy's dungeons are, and you know you're in for a world of hurt. Only series veterans will know how to safely navigate them. But newcomers who try to brute force their way through are gonna discover just how merciless these dungeons really are. The dungeons across the entire trilogy, including the remakes of Parts 1 and 2, are downright diabolical, and you'll be grateful for the built-in map when it's all over. That's the kind of tension you'll be juggling from time to time. And remember, this is just on the regular Dragon Quest difficulty. From a visual standpoint, Dragon Quest I and 2 HD-2D Remake might look similar to last year's Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake, at least at first glance. But when you see all three games side by side, the difference is remarkable. Keep in mind that Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake is running on PS5, while Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake here is running on Switch 2, both in performance mode. As such, Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake features much heavier post-processing, which slightly softens the image, not by much, but just enough to let the sprites blend more naturally with their 3D environments. That same post-processing also gives the visuals more atmosphere and drama. Take Moonbrook, for example. When you arrive there hours after the opening, the lighting and tone feel somber and haunting. Conversely, towns practically burst with color. Bright, saturated hues and jaunty music make each one feel full of life and warmth. I've seen a lot of players asking lately whether they should wait for Part 1 before jumping in, or even what order to play these remakes in. It's a fair question, especially now that the Erdrick Trilogy is finally complete. But Square Enix clearly designed these remakes to be experienced in sequence. Dragon Quest III, then 1, then 2. And when you play them that way, everything just clicks. Dragon Quest I is the perfect palate cleanser, simple, focused, and cozy, in a way that only a great follow-up can be. Dragon Quest II then builds on that foundation with the scope and spectacle you'd expect from a true finale. Together, they form the beating heart of the Erdrick Trilogy, two adventures that couldn't be more different, yet complement each other perfectly. And that's what makes Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake such a remarkable collection. It unites two classics in one package, reminding us how far this series has come, and why its beginnings still matter just as much today. Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake is coming out on October 30th on Nintendo Switch 1 and 2, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC.